Welcome to the Data Deep Dive for the Success Network, the Illinois Education and Career Success Network Policy Committee. I see many familiar names and faces here, and also some new names and faces. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. For those of you who are just joining, please do drop your name and organization in the chat. And I'm just going to give a quick overview of where we're going today. And then we will go ahead and dive in. My name is Emily Ruska. I'm Director of Policy at Education Systems Center at Northern Illinois University. Thank you again for being here. I'm staffing the College and Career, or this Policy Committee of the Illinois Education and Career Success Network. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to do some welcome and intros, and I'll have a handful of my teammates here at Ed Systems introduce themselves. I will lay some groundwork for our data review that we're going to go through today, and then we'll spend some time with secondary measures and then some time with some post-secondary and employment measures. Some of these measures will be familiar to you all. Some of them may be new. We'll introduce some newer data resources that we've been engaging with. And so really looking forward to engaging with all of you on this today. As you can see, we are recording. We will share that recording out and the slides out after the meeting. It'll be available on our Success Network website on the Policy Committee page. So anything that you're excited to see and want to know more about, we will certainly be sharing these materials after the fact. As we're going through, just as a matter of housekeeping, we will have some dedicated pause points where we're going to more openly invite discussion around the measures that we're reviewing, and we have some pointed questions to that end. But if you've got reflections and questions meanwhile, please don't hesitate to add those to the chat, and we will, the Ed Systems team will be doing our best to keep an eye on those as we're going through. So again, if you haven't already, please do share your name and organization in the chat. And again, it's just really exciting to see such a range of folks on the line here. We've got folks from secondary, post-secondary, CBOs. We've got some researchers on the line. It's just really exciting to see such a cool range of folks, both in the Success Network and beyond. So, I'm going to pose these two questions and would love for you to drop an answer to either or both of these in the chat. But the first question being, what is one word to describe how you engage with data in your role? And the second question is, which data resources do you find yourself turning to the most, whether that's the report card or some other sort of dashboard, et cetera? Thanks, Sam, for leading the charge on question one, inform. Cassie, cautiously, love that. Amy, hopefully you feel less lacking after today. And love all these different data resources, whether it's Perkins data from ISB or, naming some dashboards. Data are crucial, it's true. Confidential data sets. Well, Meg, we'll have to put you on the spot at some point. Awesome. Well, please don't hesitate to keep dropping your thoughts about how you engage with data, what sort of data you're particularly, you engage with on a regular basis as we continue to move through here. So I'm going to set the stage and get us as quickly as possible to engaging with the data so that we can keep the conversation going here. But I'm just going to first start with some core principles, right? So, the way we think about data at Ed Systems and with the Success Network is thinking about what can data enable us to do, right? And so we see it as sort of both a window and a mirror, right? That data can serve as a window to look out and develop insights into our students, our schools, our districts, but also that those same data can help us hold up a mirror to ourselves and gather some insights about what we're doing that is resulting in the outcomes that we may be seeing among students or in the field. And so I encourage you all to keep that in mind as we move through today. The other thing that we like to center is thinking about how data can help us inform equity, right? If we are thinking that if we are grappling with the systems and the policies and the practices that are resulting in the outcomes that we're seeing, recognizing that our systems are producing what they are designed to produce. What does it mean about our systems, and what might we need to think about in terms of redesign or reinvention that can help us drive towards equity, where folks are met where they're at, and they are being supported to reach their full potential. So, we like this particular visual of equality versus equity, right? The same bicycle is not going to work for everybody depending on their size, their physical ability or limitations or challenges, et cetera, right? So recognizing that we need to think about how we design better to produce more equitable results. And broadly, we think about how engagement with data is one step in a broader theory of action, right? That it takes quality data and capacity around engaging with data. It takes using those data to drive our actions, to drive toward these focused results and increasing attainment or success for students in a variety of ways. So, again, thank you for being here with us today on the lunch hour or post-lunch hours, it may be for some of you. The last note I will just make before I ask my colleagues to introduce themselves from the Ed Systems team is thinking about data and how we use it as a tool. And so, I know for a lot of folks in the education arena in particular, can experience data being used as a hammer, right? As for critique, as for dismantling different things. But how can we use instead as a hammer and use it instead as a flashlight? And think about, if the power goes out in your house late at night and it's dark, you're not swinging a hammer around. You're using a flashlight to identify where the issue might be, and then figuring out what other tools you might need in order to solve the problem. But thinking about how data can help us shine a light on areas for improvement, but also areas for celebration. And so encourage you to think about these things today as we go through. So with that, I'm going to pause really quickly, and I'm going to invite my colleagues who are going to be presenting alongside me today to introduce themselves. So first I'll say Edith Jaguna from the Ed Systems team. Edith, if you wouldn't mind going, and then we'll go Ben, Rusbe, and Dominique.
Hi, everyone. I'm Edith Jaguna, Director of the Illinois Education and Career Success Network. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, well, welcome everyone. I'm Ben Bohr. I'm the Senior Director of Data here at Education Systems Center, and really happy to be here and excited to present.
Hi, I'm Rusbe, Data Analyst at Ed Systems, and excited to talk about data.
Hi, my name is Dominique Janvier. I'm also a data analyst and a newest member of the Ed Systems team, and I'm excited to be here with you all.
Thank you, team. Okay, so we're going to dive in. Again, we'll start with secondary measures. We'll have a couple of groupings of data, and then we'll pause sort of in between those as we go through. Again, please don't hesitate to drop questions, reflections, etc. in the chat, but we also will be pausing for discussion more broadly between each section of the data. So we'll go ahead and keep going. Ben, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome everyone. So we're actually going to just start with in some ways, the most basic high school data. Two of the data points from the report card that I think most people have interacted with before: ninth grade on track and graduation rate. And really, just wanted to present some of the trends in the data. As you can see here, we're looking at ninth grade on track. And then one of the things we wanted to emphasize is thinking about the data longitudinally, and thinking about, what happened in ninth grade, and then what's happened, and then what is the relationship between what's happened in ninth grade and then what's the high school graduation rates. The work by the consortium who helped develop the ninth grade on track is that there is a relationship between the two, and as ninth grade on track rises, that high school graduation will as well. And then as we get later in the presentation, we'll be looking at a number of other metrics, and our hope is to think about how do those other metrics influence, can they and do they influence that relationship over time. So I think, everyone was aware that we had a drop off in ninth grade on track during the COVID years, but we've seen some progress moving up in recent years. So that's the first slide here. And then the next slide is our high school graduation rates, and again a slight drop through COVID, though folks can see Black graduation rates have been going up steadily, and then we seem to be recovering slightly from the downtick during the COVID year, but wanted to share these two slides and then open it up for an initial conversation about what people are seeing in their districts and communities.
And feel free to come off mute to share your reflections or drop them in the chat here.
I mean, I think it makes sense that when more ninth graders are on track to graduate, graduation rates increase. So I guess, that's something I think that all of us would say makes sense, but I'm glad to see the data confirm it. Be disturbing if the relationship was opposite.
Yeah, I think one of the positives actually is despite the drop off during the COVID years, and we know that data collection in those years was also challenging, we're longitudinally those same students who were affected were in school in ninth grade in 2021. We're starting to see restoration. So sort of kudos to the schools and communities. We're actually seeing, I think, an uptick in graduation rates despite that drop off in those years. Other reactions or thoughts about ninth grade on track? In particular, are there things that people are focused on at the school level to improve graduation rates, and we're going to talk about some of the work, some of the other metrics around CT and pathways in a moment, but would love to hear what people are doing on the ground.
At West Aurora, we've instituted ARC, it's academic readiness class, but targeted intervention, supported study hall with some other opportunities for students. They're placed in their literacy scores, recommendations from middle school teachers, and really meant to help support the ninth grade on track data metric.
So Laura, just to follow up on that, that was in response to the ninth grade on track measure or anticipating the ninth grade on track measure?
In response to.
Great. So really an example of using the data to inform your practice locally. That's awesome.
Absolutely, yes. Kind of on that same vein, our high school principal has implemented committees linked to each of the data points of the school report card. So yes, we have this academic readiness class, but we also have a ninth grade on track school-wide committee, teachers, administrators, and other committees as well linked to each of the metrics on the report card to kind of foster, even though we're a very large high school, that we're all in this together, we're all working toward a lot of the same goals. So.
I just noticed Shelby's comment. Shelby will be interested to see how that impacts the numbers, obviously, and then also how, I think, it would be great to sort of keep tabs on how that influences the change in definition around ninth grade on track, how that changes the relationship to graduation, right? So, the hope here is to some extent that the ninth grade on track measure is a indicator, and so better understanding that relationship as you change the definition will be an important piece of the work moving forward.
Thanks, Alex, for noting the 2 and 3 resources as well. And to that end, anyone who has additional data resources on these or any other data points, please don't hesitate to drop them in the chat. We're always open to additional resources. And, one of the core questions at the end of this will be, what might we want to dive in more deeply? Where might we want to dive in more deeply? And what resources might help us do that? Awesome. So I'm going to just advance us to the next sort of set of data, which are around early college coursework. So we'll look at some raw numbers and some rates and some differences across demography here. So the first slide we have up here is the counts for early college coursework participation. So generally there's an uptick in early college coursework participation. We've got AP in the green line on top. We've got dual credit in the blue line on the bottom. So these counts, over time are generally increasing with a little bit of a drop with COVID as well in the AP lines there. But dual credit has generally remained steadily increasing over time. Just to look at those same numbers a little bit differently, we wanted to just show the rates as well, because the raw counts sometimes can obfuscate some of the other insights we might have. And so here are the rates of participation in AP and dual credit. They, roughly, they look very similar to the raw counts here. About 25% of students in Illinois, in high school students in Illinois are participated in AP courses last year, and about 17% participated in dual credit last year. And when we look at those numbers from a disaggregated standpoint, we've got the counts here on the slide. And so what this represents is for a handful of demographic groups, we've got white students in the green line, Black students in the red line, and Latinx students in the yellow line here. And so you can see the changes over time by those different demographic groups. There's been some increases, there's been some dips at different points. And so I'll just pause here and let folks take these data in, and then we'll look at change, percentage change year over year by these different demographic groups. Again, don't hesitate to drop reflections in the chat or questions in the chat if you have them. And I'll just note, what we see, the top line is the blue line. That's the total students enrolling in dual credit over the last several school years. That number increasing over time, but we're still seeing pretty persistent gaps in terms of the counts. And that also holds true when you look at rates of participation, although, rates may be a little bit narrower than these counts may look like. So to Angie, to your question of enrollment versus completion, the dual credit completion data are not included on the report card, and they're the limitations. ICCB puts out a dual credit report every year. I believe that has some data on completion, but the data sources are slightly different than what the Illinois report card uses. And so I think we are strongly interested in completion as well. And we're strongly interested in the amount of college credits earned, right? So we can get a sense of what's the right dosage. I believe that ICCB has been working on a study around dosage of dual credit and how much of it has what type of impact on longer term student outcomes. Certainly the literature more broadly nationally indicates that, earning early college credit has positive impacts on post-secondary enrollment and completion rates in the longer term, but we certainly want to be able to see that more longitudinally in the state as well. So appreciate that question. This slide here is percentage change in dual enrollment by race and ethnicity. So this is a year over year change. And so, we wanted to account for the fact that when we looked at the previous slide, there are some instances where the count is relatively small, right? The denominator is relatively small. So the change year over year might seem dramatic in some cases when it's a matter of a couple of hundred students. But to see over time how those changes have evolved and account for some of those fluctuations. So I'll pause here and let folks take this in. You can see some pretty dramatic swings sometimes year over year when you look at different demographic groups. But overall, the past year over year has been an increase across all the groups, although, at different rates, certainly. So I wanted to just pause for discussion here. What are the things that you were noticing as we went through those early college credit data first? And then what might that mean around policy and practice? Thank you, Jess, for this comment about random acts of dual credit on the radar. We talk about it all the time at Ed Systems and certainly agree. And I think, one of the things that I've presented about a couple of times in different settings is the policy frameworks that we have in Illinois around strategic dual credit. So that being our model program of our model partnership agreement under the Dual Credit Quality Act has an emphasis on core academic courses and career-focused instruction. The Perkins Model Programs of Study Guides that we created alongside the Community College Board emphasize strategic early college credit in those programs of study, as well as the College and Career Pathway endorsements and the College and Career Readiness Indicator under ESSA. So definitely agree with that and can't wait to dive into the article you shared. Alex, I see your question in the chat around representation and proportionality. I might put Meg, I know I saw Meg Bates on the line. I may have Meg jump in and talk a little bit about what you found in your study that you published last year around dual credit and representation, because I feel like your report did a really good job of diving into some of the details there.
Yeah, sure thing, Emily. So I guess first of all, I'm just looking at this question about CPS, and I will say like CPS is really lower on the end of dual credit offering than most. So that it's an interesting area of growth. Sort of what we found in terms of representation is that because of Illinois' investment in a number of policies related to expanding dual credit access, the tide is rising in access to dual credit for all racial ethnic groups. But sort of interestingly, the gaps aren't closing. So there's more taking of dual credit, but the same level of disparity remains between, white students and particularly Black and Latino students. One interesting thing, like we looked at if that's caused by different access at different districts, and it is. Dual credit tends to be most popular in rural districts, which tend to be more white. But there is like a closure of some gaps within districts that have been offering dual credit for a while, which is a really positive sign. So it seems like as districts get experience with offering it and expanding access to students, it does tend to start closing gaps within districts.
Thank you, Meg, for offering that insight. I'm curious, to Meg's point, what we've heard a lot in our engagement with districts around the state and in the Success Network is around real and perceived barriers to accessing dual credit. And I think the perspective of students can be different at times than the perspectives of the adults managing the system. But I'm curious, for those of you who are in a district that is working on scaling up dual credit, what are some of the ways in which your community has worked on ensuring equitable access to dual credit and thinking about how different students might gain access, and what has shaped those decisions and those practices and on the ground level?
So I'm Laura Sullivan and I work with Effingham Unit 40. We are a rural school district and we do have several dual credit options for our students in both career and technical education as well as academic classes. And one of the things our school district did a couple years ago is set a flat fee for dual credit. So our community college does charge, I believe it's about $18.75 per credit hour for each dual credit class that is taught. And our district, I believe, has set a $25 fee for a dual credit fee. And then, so you can take 3 dual credit classes and only pay $25, or you take 1 class and pay $25. That is an effort to help some of our economically disadvantaged students to afford that dual credit option.
Thank you for sharing that. And I saw in the chat about West Aurora paying the fees for dual credit students, and that's certainly a model. Costs certainly come up frequently in terms of one of the opportunities and barriers for access here. Kim, thanks for sharing. North Chicago pays all tuition and fees for students in dual credit, and also for the students at the Lake County Tech campus. That's exciting. I'm curious what practices around dual credit recruitment. Like, how do you go about recruiting students for dual credit, and how you think that may or may not impact who is gaining access?
I'm happy to talk about that, Emily.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kim.
We're a smaller Title I school up in Northern Lake County, Illinois. So we're actually north of Chicago. We're not in CPS. And we are about 98% student of color. So my whole philosophy is that everybody knows about it and knows that it's accessible to them. So from freshman year on, we talk about it, even though currently we're only offering it to juniors and seniors. And we want to make sure that the students understand what the prerequisites are at the community college in order to access the classes. And we just stay on top of it with the counseling team every year. So when we're having course selection meetings, the counselors are constantly talking about those options as they move into their sophomore year, and then sophomore year when they get to choose that as an option for their junior and senior year. So we're reaching out to the students who already qualify with their grade point average and ACT or SAT scores. But then we're also talking a lot to the students who are kind of in that gray area, who can take some of the basic testing and might actually do well and gain access to the courses. And then I found that the way our students are cohorted, the seniors or the rising seniors have a lot to do with talking to the students that are coming up as sophomores, getting them enrolled in the classes, basically getting them to understand that they can do it. Because I think more than anything, confidence issue with our students. But once they get in there and they recognize in the first semester that isn't as bad as they thought it might be, you see the confidence boost. And then by senior year, these kids are killing it. So it's really fun to watch that progression over time.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Kim. Hey, I'm going to pivot us. I'm going to advance us, but really appreciate the discussion on how we can increase early college enrollment, and particularly for students who haven't necessarily accessed it previously. I'm going to hand the mic over to Edith from our team to just help set a little bit of context around the Illinois Education and Career Success Network and the demography in our leadership community.
Great, thanks, Emily. Excuse me. So before we dive into the next section, we wanted to give a little bit of context. Many of you are familiar with the Success Network leadership communities. These are communities that have established formal partnerships across different sectors, including secondary, post-secondary, employers, and community-based organizations. And they've identified shared goals and committed to using data for continuous improvement. So we started with 6 communities in 2015 and now have 19 communities across the state, from both urban, suburban, rural. So all types of demographics are represented. And the data you're looking at represents demographics in the state and in the network. And this first visual includes Chicago, which has a substantial number of Black and Latinx students. Next slide. And this next one does not include Chicago. And so the demographics are fairly similar to the state when we take out Chicago. So just wanted to provide that context before we dive into the next piece of data. And I'll kick it over to you, Roosevelt.
So now we're looking at some metrics that are comparing within Success Network and out of Success Network districts. So in this slide, we're looking at CTE participation statewide versus Success Network. If we look at, and then also CTE concentrators, we find that it's concentrators are more similar than participation, where participation is less in Success Network districts from 22-23. Curious what the updated numbers look like though. But different for CCPE in the next slide, where we see a dramatic increase in college and career pathway endorsements over the years. We have the most recent data visualized here, and but but it's not equitably, the endorsements aren't equitably distributed across districts. They differ dramatically based on district characteristics. So here we see an individual breakdown of the demographics of students obtaining college and career pathway endorsements. We see it's overrepresented by white students. And then in the next slide, we see this one is again breaking down non-Success Network and Success Network districts and endorsement earners across districts. And we see Success Network districts having a greater proportion of endorsements than non-Success Network districts.
Ruth, I'm going to pause you for 1 second because there's a question in the chat just wanting for additional information on the college and career pathway endorsement. So we'll offer that real quick here. For those of you who are less involved in it than we are, we're always in the weeds on it. So I appreciate the callback. College and career pathway endorsements were established in the 2016 Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, which created 4 student-centered competency-based approaches to preparing young people for college and career and life. And so the pathway endorsement is a system that by which districts are offering a series of coursework and opportunities to help young people prepare for their future. And that includes career-focused early college coursework, that includes work-based learning, that includes ensuring that students are academically ready for post-secondary, et cetera. And so there's, Edith, thank you for dropping the link in the chat to the PWR Act. So that's what the CCP is in general, right? So a student completes a series of activities and coursework, and they earn an endorsement on their diploma, just like they could the bilingual certification that they can get on their endorsement. April, to your question in the chat, the Success Network versus Success Network versus non is that distinction that Edith was talking about of leadership communities versus just the broader base of communities in the state. And thank you again, Edith, for that link. Ruzbe, back to you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because endorsements can be given in various different pathways. So we're talking about total endorsements, but endorsements can be given in different sectors. Some include health sciences, information technology, manufacturing. So again, we're talking about total endorsements. If in the next slide, endorsements, unfortunately, vary by district characteristics. So here we're looking at district wide endorsements by percent funding adequacy. So the degree to which the district is funded adequately. And we see that there's, again, an overrepresentation of endorsements in districts that are funded at 100% or greater than 100% adequacy. Less endorsements are happening. Students are receiving less endorsements in districts that are funded less adequately. And Ben is definitely the funding expert for questions on that metric. And in the next, oh, go ahead.
Just so essentially what we're seeing here is that the bulk of endorsements that have been earned by students have been earned by students who are in districts that are adequately funded, right? And that districts that are less adequately funded tend to be or have conferred fewer CCPE in the last year here.
And in this graph, we're looking at demographic enrollment at the district level. And so this is for districts that have greater than 40% student enrollment of Black, Hispanic, white, and low income, the total number of endorsements differ. So districts that are greater than 40% white hold the majority of CCPE endorsements. And districts that are 40% Black hold very few CCPE endorsements.
I would just add, you know, while the state has made great progress in equity over the last number of years, there is still a pretty high correlation between funding adequacy and the demographics of districts. And so, you know, we can see that relationship here is that because districts that are funded better offer the CCPE more often, that tends to be that ends up being the districts that have more white students are also are overrepresented for CCPE, and this is, you know, obviously the beginning of a conversation. So.
Yeah, so, you know, as you'll note from I'm going to go back a couple slides just to drive this point home. As you'll note, you know, the CCPE data, the overall total college and career pathway endorsements earned data on the left-hand side here, the bar chart, comes from ISB publishing those data annually. The data on the right around the the demography of students earning endorsements actually comes from submissions for the College and Career Readiness Indicator under ESSA, because that's one of the ways that students can sort of check the box of being college and career ready is by earning an endorsement. And given the sequence of when those are submitted, those numbers are slightly different. But we can tell generally that, you know, even that though it's an undercount, that undercount still shows that through when we're looking at it in a disaggregated way, that endorsements are not necessarily distributed equitably across different student demographic groups, which is what prompted us to think, okay, what are the other ways that we can look at these data in order to understand where the equity dimensions are, to Ben's point, around funding adequacy, around student demography, et cetera. And so ideally, I think what we would love to be able to do and would be advocating for is much more robust disaggregated data by endorsement area so that we can see how those patterns may evolve over different endorsement areas as well, to Ruth's point earlier.
Kim had a good point that people are still getting CCPEs approved. So conferring the endorsements, that number is delayed in reporting. Yeah,
that's definitely true. And I would say that given that the House bill that was passed in 2022, House Bill 3296, which amended the PWR Act to basically, you know, up until that point, offering college and career pathway endorsements was fully voluntary. Now it is a default expectation of districts serving any of grades 9 through 12. The deadline for submitting for approval and commencing implementation is this summer. And so we expect those numbers to substantially increase. The other data that we would love for ISB to publish, frankly, are the total all of the districts that have been approved to offer CCPE, so that we can see where CCPE are either technically being offered and not being taken up, or only being offered on paper, et cetera, so that we can understand some dimensions there as well. I'm seeing a lot of discussion in the chat. Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, one thing I would just highlight is we were talking about random acts of dual credit earlier, and I think one of the hopes as a CCPE is to make dual credit more integrated into a student's experience. So what that relationship looks like will be something to examine over time as well. Recognizing all the constraints on offering dual credit that are being put in the chat.
Mm-hmm. So just want to, I see there's some good, robust discussion in the chat around challenges around implementation and what some of those barriers might include. I'm curious if there's anything else that comes up for folks as we reviewed those data, anything surprising or, confirming, et cetera.
I mean, I put it in the chat, but it doesn't surprise me that districts that have more money had an easier time implementing the law because the law didn't come with any resources, financial resources. So, I mean, when you make districts do something, those districts that already have enough resources are generally the most likely to be able to get the people and the personnel resources and the financial resources aligned to make it happen. So I don't think that that should necessarily surprise anyone.
Sure.
I also want to say something about the random acts of dual credit, and I don't know if this is, I know some people have already heard me say this, but this is about rural students again, and rural students that reside in places on the fringes of community colleges districts and then travel into a district different than the one in which they reside in to take CTE coursework. Their dual credit can't be anything other than random because they're traveling into a district in which they don't live to get their dual credit. And then when they travel back to the district, the community college district in which they live, that community college doesn't want to accept the credit on a one-to-one basis. And so like there's pockets of the state where like this whole random acts, like some of this, it's the way the system's set up. Like these kids are getting random dual credit that doesn't go back to their community college, not by any fault of districts or by students themselves, but again, by the fault of adults that didn't design a better system where people aren't living in community college districts and going to school in a different one. So I don't know if that was the right time to bring it up, but I know I brought it up in a couple other meetings and we need help with it. I need help with it.
It's not the right time, Cassie.
Thank you, Emily.
I mean, and it's certainly relevant, right? I mean, I think as we think about everything that folks have been saying around the requirements around implementing CCPE, one of the questions that we've been grappling with at Ed Systems is what are the ways in which the process is sort of getting in the way of students accessing things that would benefit them, right? And so that's another example of where like you said, the people who built the system built it to make it easier for them, frankly, in a lot of ways, and not necessarily easier for students. And so that certainly is something that we need to be attuned to. Appreciate the robust discussion here, and I think particularly for folks who are in different contexts where the local community college is still very far and or, overlapping boundaries, et cetera, like that can be really, really sticky and is something that I think we're looking to explore more with the policy committee as well. So I'm going to go ahead and tip us over into post-secondary and employment measures, which brings up Dominique.
Thank you, Emily. Next slide. Yes, so here we're looking at post-secondary enrollment within 16 months of graduation. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about post-secondary enrollment, especially post-pandemic, at our 2-year and 4-year institutions. So just looking at these bars, we see that there was a little bit of a dip pre-pandemic, but since it's been slowly rising, if we look at the orange bar, our 2-year institutions, we've stagnated a bit going into the class of 2022. And then with our 4-year in blue, we've seen a slight increase, going from 38% the class of 2020 to 41% in the class of 2022. I mentioned earlier in the chat that the National Student Clearinghouse did release their current term enrollment estimates for fall 2022, which does indicate that enrollment has sort of bounced back since the pandemic. They've seen the strongest amount of growth actually in 2-year institutions in our community colleges. But that data isn't necessarily available in the report card yet. I anticipate that once ISB does update the report card that we'll see a little bit more of a higher bar going to the class of 2023 and 2024. So overall, I think it is moving positively. Obviously, there are different trends depending on sectors. So there's different trends among different racial and ethnic groups, and then between 2-year and 4-year institutions. So definitely I encourage you all, if you're interested, to look at the data that the National Student Clearinghouse has put out. They have some amazing dashboards that let you explore the data. And then there's, just paired with this, there are some interesting trends with dual enrollment that we talked about earlier. Sorry, I know we went to the college remediation rates, but I wanted to mention with dual enrollment, we actually saw an increase in students, high school students taking dual enrollment during the pandemic. So I think that paired with a lot of the other, efforts to increase enrollment, like transitional education, those things could really help us see a push as we're trying to get those rates up. Sorry, okay, now we can go to college remediation rates. So the headline here is that we've seen a general downward trend in our college remediation rates, which is really great. Sort of indicates that sort of the other initiatives that we've been putting forward are really starting to work. Again, namely our dual credit and sort of like early college, transitional working, all of those things, helping us to get those remediation rates down. Just one thing to note here, paired with our enrollment rates, there's just a little bit of complexity when we talk about remediation. We actually put out a blog post pretty late last year that goes into some of those complexities and how we need to be looking at remediation enrollment against our college enrollment. So I'm just gonna put that in the chat. But generally, it's very encouraging seeing these trends. Particularly, I think in reading, that's one of the main ones where as enrollment is increasing, we're also seeing a downward trend in remedial English enrollment. So some good trends here.
And I realized that just like with CCPE, we didn't give context on what transitional instruction is. And so for those of you who are uninitiated on that, that was another strategy that was established by the PWR Act in 2016. And it created, it pushed the state to create two things: transitional instruction in English and transitional instruction in math. Transitional instruction in math is default expectation of high school serving districts. They can opt out by board decision. Transitional English is fully voluntary by districts. So transitional math ramped up significantly, or was established, and the competencies and policies around it were developed shortly after the PWR Act was passed and signed into law. And so that's what we frankly attribute a good amount of this progress towards in terms of math. Transitional English has been more recent in development and implementation, so those numbers have just been sort of gradually coming down over time, but it's not a is not a requirement. It's not a statutory requirement of districts to offer it, but any reduction in remediation is cause for celebration. We will continuously advocate for these numbers to be disaggregated when they are publicly available, which they are not currently. And so, what we would love to be able to do, to Ben's point earlier, is be able to follow a lot of these things longitudinally in a disaggregated way, which we currently cannot based on how things are reported on the report card, which is very comprehensive. And as always, there's trade-offs when what data are available. I think we're pulling over to Ben here to take us into employment. Thank you, Dominique.
Great, thanks, Emily, and congratulations to Dominique on her first webinar presentation for Education Systems Center. We're very happy to have her. So what we wanted to jump in here is actually point and sort of highlight a new tool that is actually a collaboration between ICCB, IBHE, the Department of Employment Security, and the Census Bureau. So the Census Bureau has released this tool which connects employment data with college data that both ICCB and IBHE provide. I don't believe anybody from IBHE or ICCB is on right now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think I've seen anyone from there.
No, I didn't see. Okay. They were excited that we were presenting, but had a conflict on this. But what you're seeing here is a few screenshots of data, and we actually will bring up the tool itself. But just at a high level, what it provides is averages 1, 5, and 10 years for certain degree types that different students are attaining. So you see here for associate's degrees, connection to average earnings, 1, 5 years and 10 years out. On the next slide, we show those same results for baccalaureate earners. You'll notice this is for all partner institutions in Illinois, which is actually most of the colleges, both community colleges and four-year universities in Illinois that we have this data for. And then on the final slide, we show the same thing for master's degrees. And I think somewhat not surprising, we see as a degree type matures, we see an increase in earnings. Obviously, the further out someone is in employment, we also see increase in earnings. I will say one thing to be cognizant of that we noticed in the data is that the premium for a degree, so the percent amount over time goes up. So while in initial years it's about a 15% premium. Can we go back one slide again? And I think it's about a 15% premium. 5 and 10 years later, the premium for baccalaureates goes up. And I know there are conversations about the ongoing value of degrees and also what type of degrees. And so I think that lends itself to a conversation to show the tool, which actually has a variety of stuff. So I don't know, Emily, if I can share my screen. Is that possible?
I was gonna have you do that, and I'll drop this link in the chat for folks as well. So that, and again, we'll share out the tools and the recording and the slide deck. But for those of you who want to dive in at home as well.
And so what I showed previously were just screenshots. We wanted to, sort of hit on that data. But what you can see here is that based on the degree level, and you can actually select that here. Not only do we have associates and baccalaureates, but we also have certificates, information, and even PhD and professional practice degrees. But then you can also look at particular programs. We can also look regionally, and I think one thing to be just very cognizant of is that obviously, at different regions in the state, they're very different. We have very different cost of livings in the state. So while you might see a lower lower average wage for a community college that's in a more rural setting, that may be a very high value in that community. Illinois actually has one of the greatest variances in terms of cost of living of any state in the country. But you can actually select particular colleges and see their premium, their average wages, and then in addition to that, you can look at this. We were looking at 1 year, 5 year, and 10 year. We can also look at percentiles. So in this case, we're looking at the 5 year average, but we're not only looking at the average, we're also looking at the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile. So it gives you really a lot of information on degrees. So 10 years out, if we're looking at a baccalaureate degree, the 75th percentile, the wages could be as high as $108,000, and then we can break that down by a degree type. So we can add in. We can see for something like math and statistics, it's a little higher, and for something like business and management, it's even higher, or something like the physical sciences. So definitely a lot of information to be seen here. Again, I think, while, obviously there's a premium, wage premium for degrees, it does depend on the type of degree, and you can actually look in here and examine some of that information as well. At this time, there's no demographic breakdown, so that's not available with the tool, but I know it's something that the agencies are asking for. And all of this data is maintained at Census. The underlying data is maintained at Census, the Census Bureau.
Then I'm wondering if
Questions?
it might make sense to pick a particular like pathway and maybe like go through each of the steps and sort of see what those premiums look like.
Yeah, for a particular
Like a
instructional
particular,
program.
yeah. Is
So
there,
we might,
for folks on
so
the
we
line,
might
is
look
there
at like an
particular one?
associate's degree. Well, you know, we could
Well,
do
they also have
education.
certifications, right? I feel like that might be.
Yeah, at the certification level. So we have something like the construction trades for certification. And you can see here, you know, this is, I think, where, you know, in the construction trades, even with the certification, the wage premium can be pretty significant.
I'll note that that's 10 years out. So I'm curious if that is substantially different if you look at 1 or 5 years out.
But we can switch back to time.
So these are people that graduated from the institution where you have the institution toggled to that then the college is reported like an associate's degree completion or bachelor's or whatever it is. And then they've connected it to their wage data. And so is there, so, okay, I don't think I know what my question is yet, but there's something. And then
Yeah, so I
also,
mean,
what's
ahead.
this flows button? Because I clicked on this flows button under like on the data type.
The
What's
flows
that
button is
button?
actually pretty cool. I feel like that would be fun to dive a little bit into. It shows you where people end up essentially, like what types of
Yes.
sectors they're in. And so you can see, like, if you're filtering, so this is filtering, if we unclick all, you know, people who are completing certificates in construction and trades are ending up, you know, the plurality seem to be ending up in construction, manufacturing, et cetera, but you see other sectors as well, which, you know, particularly when we're thinking about what are high value certificates that are sub associate certificates or sub baccalaureate certificates, like, are those actually resulting in people ending up in those places? I think there's also a geographic flow you can look at to see brain drain type questions. There's lots of really fun ways you can play with these data. Any other questions or wonderings with this tool up for folks?
So if I click on flows and then I click all other instructional programs and I click health professions.
And it's showing you,
So
it's showing you both. Yeah.
so the big darker line that goes from on the left, health professions and maps to health care, that's the people that were in a health professions program that actually ended up in healthcare as an industry
Yes.
versus going to, okay, that is kind of neat.
Yeah, so you can see that there were 4 people who ended up in agriculture, forestry, et cetera, who had completed some sort of health professions certificate of 1 to 2 years, right?
Have you guys noticed any programs where there's a real mismatch where students take the program but don't end up in the career?
I think this is where, you know, when we dug into this as a team, we picked specific institutions, and we selected actually institutions within Success Network leadership communities, I think for the most part. And so what was interesting was seeing the variance over different communities. It really varies by region. And that also, I think, has to do with what employment outcomes are. And in terms of particularly the wages, like that could vary widely, like the same type of certificate could confer a much higher premium in certain regions just based on where real wages are at. but that's where I think the power comes with being able to drill down in particular locally on that. I think more than anything. And that also, I think, would signal local alignment of programs to opportunities. Ben, there's a question in the chat around linking, and how are they linking individuals, including their education data, to the job outcome data when the individual census responses are relatively anonymous? Do you have a sense of how that works?
Yeah, so I should have been clearer. It's the Census Bureau that's doing the linking, but they're not using census responses. They're using employment, they're using wage data based on in our case in Illinois from the Department of Employment Security but the equivalent agencies in other states. And then they're linking that with the post-secondary data. So it's not that they're linking it. It's just that census is one of the best statistical and most secure agencies in our federal government for the use of data. And so they were sort of tasked with putting this together for those reasons.
I know we see a comment in the chat of, talking with people and them saying that they have not, they have a credential or a certificate that they don't end up using because they weren't sure what they wanted to study earlier. And that's where, I wonder, Ben, if we can pull this down and kind of return to the discussion, that's where a part of the purpose of this policy committee is to think about what does this mean? Both in terms of how might we interpret these data, but also more importantly, what might that mean in terms of our policies and practices? And so one thing I would argue is through interventions like the post-secondary and career expectations framework and the college and career pathway endorsement, et cetera, that young people are being provided opportunities earlier to do that exploration and better inform what they choose, make better decisions or decisions that are better aligned to their interests when they get to that post-secondary step. And so theoretically, that can help address some of that mismatch. But I'm curious what other implications come up for folks as we think about what these data might signal for us from a policy or a practice standpoint.
Well, I'm going to explore the flows a little bit more because I think there's stuff that you could learn there about how closely tied the community college CTE program is to employers, because I would think that especially in CTE, graduates of those programs should be employed in those industries, So I'm going to play around with that a little bit more, if that's how this works.
Yeah.
Cassie, I'll do a pitch. One of the major projects that I help work on is the state's longitudinal data system, which we're still in the process of building. But, this tool allows us to connect things like post-secondary information to employment information. I think, our hope in the future is that we'll also be able to link things like course taking data to post-secondary information and workforce data. It may not be as complete as this because this has data from other states, but at least within Illinois, we should be able to do that type of thing as well and be able to do analysis there.
Any other insights or surprises that bubbled up for folks as we were sort of clicking around in the Explorer? Or in thinking about post-secondary enrollment while recognizing some of the limitations with the National Student Clearinghouse data updates?
And I have the flows going, and if you hit under destination flow, geo, it shows you how many of them stayed in Illinois and where they went if they didn't stay in Illinois.
It's pretty cool.
I feel like community colleges could use that to show that their graduates are likely to stay in the state. Well, I mean, I guess if that's how it plays out, you could put, hey, you could put all sorts of stuff in here.
Yeah. I'll shift us to our last set of questions here. You know, curious about which measures you found to be the most helpful to dive into. As well as sort of, you know, we've started talking about some of the policy implications, but also want to know, you know, are there other data that you would like to dive into more in the future with this group? You know, as we think about diving in more in a more granular way in some spaces.
I might add a question, you know, which is which data relationships are people interested in as well? I mean, I know we talked about ninth grade on track and high school graduation at the beginning. We've been talking about, you know, dual enrollment, and we talked about the relationship between, you know, post-secondary and college earnings. Are there other, you know, Cassie, you brought up CT coursework and the relationship there. Are there other relationships like that people are interested in?
Well, I'm definitely interested in, I think Emily talked about it earlier, in like how much dual credit, like what is the dose of dual credit that makes a difference, you know, because we, you know, the law put 6 hours in CCPE. I mean, is that the dose that like improves graduation rate, college going, earnings, whatever it is? You know, I don't know that we, you know what the dose is. So I'm still interested in that. And then I'm always interested in the Perkins data measures, you know, the non-trad, you know, what the significance is, you know, for like every percentage point we get our non-trad rates up, you know, do we see women in the workforce earn more, or, you know, whatever that is. And I would also be interested more in like, and the same idea that the CCPEs are going to students in more well-resourced districts. I have a theory or questioning of, are the robust work-based learning experiences going to students in more well-resourced districts that have the time and the attention and the financial and personnel resources to establish those, you know? And I guess for me, what I would mean by work-based learning is those higher level, like if you think of like the spectrum, you know, I know we are all doing career fairs and guest speakers and industry site visits, but I mean those more higher level experiences. Because I would imagine it looks the same as the CCPE stuff. The CCPE, 60 hours is a component of CCPE, so maybe you even have like a proxy for some of it. I don't know.
Is that relationship between funding and some of these program offerings, you know, be it work-based learning or CCP, is that something that people would like to dive more into? I know Cassie, you just said that, but you know, would love to see if there are others that's of a concern too.
Well, we will certainly take additional input from folks after the meeting as you continue to reflect and look at the recording and the slide deck, et cetera. We've got our first full committee meeting in March. And so we're excited to have y'all join us for kicking off our first full committee meeting of the year in the beginning of March. Also would be remiss if I didn't mention our annual conference, which is coming up next month in Champaign. So we hope you join us. Edith, thank you for the link in the chat there. We've got a lot of really great content about policy, but also about so many other things about the nitty-gritty around work-based learning, around engagement of community partners, around engaging with data, around early college credit, et cetera. So there's lots and lots of content in store at the conference, and we hope to see many of you all there. I see, Laura, your question in the chat. Everyone always wants to know what's happening with students after they graduate, and that's kind of a big part of the thrust of Ben's work with the longitudinal data system and trying to get more data connected so that we can answer those types of questions. And we're always open to different ways to be able to manage that. So certainly that is a very big and important question for us to also validate that what we're doing is helping students successfully transition, whatever that looks like for them. But just wanted to send a big thank you to everybody for joining us today. I know it's not easy to carve out time sometimes, especially as you're getting ramped up for this term or this time of year. But really appreciate everyone's time and participation. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you've got follow-up questions for us. And thanks to our team here for pulling together some really awesome content. So thanks to our data team.